Welcome, everyone, to the Progress City Radio Hour, another Town Hall episode. My name is Jeff Crawford. I'm joined by my brother, Michael. Michael, how you doing today?
I'm doing great today. I'm very excited for our Town Hall this month.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've had a Town Hall. We had the Christmas party and all that, but we're back with a bang. Michael, who are we talking to today?
Well, I'm really excited for this one. We're speaking to Mr. Tim Delaney, a Walt Disney Imagineering all-star for several decades. Worked on everything from Epcot Paris to Hong Kong to, well, just about everything. So really excited to hear his recollections, and he's just a font of information, darn it.
He is. He came on board in a time of big-time transition. We've talked a lot about that time in the mid to late 70s, and, a new generation of Imagineers was coming on, and a lot of the classic, old-timers were still there. So a lot of stories for him to tell us today.
Absolutely. So let's dig in, get right to it. Today, we would like to welcome Mr. Tim Delaney. Tim, welcome to the show.
Wow. It's a pleasure to be here. It's
great to have you. Yeah, and this month we've been talking about all things Tomorrowland. One of the things we talk about that I see you cite as being a major influence in your creative life are the Tomorrowland specials on the Disneyland TV show. These shows are really amazing, and a show like Man in the Moon got so much right in regards to what was coming in space travel. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what these shows meant to you coming up.
Well, I bring this up, and every time I discuss it, every time I have these discussions, primarily because it had such an enormous impact on me, and these shows really were impactful. But the fact is that it had an impact on me when I was 7 years old.
Yeah,
and I know it's kind of, you guys may or may not get this, but the fact is that I actually was born and raised in Glendale.
Right.
And may not mean anything, except that that's the home of Walt Disney Imagineering. And,
exactly.
And so, when I was 7 years old, I was like everybody else. Television was kind of a novelty at those times, in the 1955. I know it'd been for a while, but there was a lot of great programming. They had a lot of sitcoms and all that. But in terms of quality programming, Walt Disney's, Disneyland television show was phenomenal. It was quality television. And the way Walt introduced the show was very similar to the way he was going to introduce his park, which was like Tinkerbell comes out and tonight's show is from Fantasyland or Frontierland, Adventureland, or Tomorrowland. Well, I can't even explain why, but I was really, really a Tomorrowland kind of guy. They go Fantasyland, like, okay. It's just, I don't know why. I just, I grew up in Glendale, California, which was kind of a 1930s movie set. It was a beautiful movie set, but I was like, I want to see something new. So when the first show, Man in Space, came out, and Walt introduced Ward Kimball. Ward Kimball was a producer of the show, and Walt always considered Ward to be, the only genius working for him. And Ward was just kind of he was kind of really a straight-laced guy in the show, because he was not only a producer, but he was in the show, and he introduced various segments of the show, and he also, introduced Werner von Braun and Willie Ley, and just talked about, kind of all this whole kind of, and what Ward acknowledged was that this is not about science fiction, it was about science fact, and he made such a big deal out of this. So I was like completely hooked. And so they had the usual typical kind of Ward Kimball wacky animation of how space travel would affect you, and when you're in outer space. But more importantly, the show kind of transitioned to like real things when Werner von Braun out, and he talked about the rocket, and then Willie Ley talked about the physics of the whole process, and then the last segment was this amazing, Max Fleischer kind of animation. I remember the Max Fleischer Superman animation shows that were done in I think the 40s or something like that. But it was just beautiful, highly styled. Yeah. And it chronicles this whole process from finding out about or talking about, the cruise and the rocket ship and the rollout of the rocket and the countdown and the blockhouse and then this launch, and then you go into outer space. And then they had this whole, heroic kind of musical score at the very end of it, which was like, the spacecraft landing back on Earth. Yeah. And I was blown away. I mean, I was 7 years old and I'm like, holy cow. And I've said this and I've read this and I've put this in writing before. It's just like, I was completely blown away. And I told my parents, like, what, is this true? Have we been to outer space? And their commentary had almost a bigger impact on me. I said, no, my mom said something like, I think Mr. Disney just made this up.
Right.
Just made this up. Just made it up. So the idea of actually taking a kind of it was probably a concrete kind of thought process, but animating it in a film where you could actually just understand it. And it had this impact on me because it created a visual storyline that made sense. And this is this whole theme that I actually currently work on a big project of my own right now, which is about creating visions. And the way you want to lead people is to create a vision. And there's something compelling about, you can create a vision in any way. You can be a writer. I had a very, very long, great friendship with Ray Bradbury, and Ray and I would talk, quite a bit about, not about his stories, but rather how he wanted to kind of be a city planner. And we would talk about things, and I thought that was impactful. So his writing was a story, but other people, create illustrations or whatever. But what the idea, the real power of creating a vision is to create something that's so compelling that other people get on board and they lead forward to make this all happen. So as I began working, when I started working at Disney, I was actually really compelled about, this whole thing about future and future stories and Epcot and all that. And it was actually kind of interested in like, well, how did this whole man in space thing go? So it started with learning about it and how they did it. And I actually was working when I was working on Epcot. I was sent to Washington. There was a big space seminar that we went to. I went to, I'm trying to imagine the man who spoke is a very famous guy. I'm just blanking on his name. But anyway, that night in Washington, I met Mrs. Werner von Braun, and I told her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think that he realized, we talked about this a little on our episode, what you were saying about visualizing a thing and conveying it to people and, inspiring people with that vision. I think Walt and von Braun were on the same page as far as knowing how to sell an idea through entertainment.
Yeah. And I think that the amazing thing about von Braun obviously, had a vision, and he was looking for people to actually make that vision, come to life. I mean, they weren't going to build it right away. I mean, Disney was going to build it, but he could actually bring the storyline.
Right.
And that's what Walt was. He was a storyteller. And there are two incredible things that happened, in my opinion. One, at the time, and when I heard this story, because I was still working, this is when I was investigating when I was working at Disney, because, you don't know much. I mean, there was no internet in those days. You had to kind of ferret all this stuff out yourself. But, the one thing that was kind of like the first cherry on top of the sundae was the story of President Eisenhower calling up Walt Disney going, I saw your show last night. I thought it was fantastic. And I got a bunch of scientists to try to get us in space and beat the Russians and get them out there. Let's get our act together. So I loved your show. Can you send that show to my scientist?
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine the president of the United States going to Walt Disney saying, can you send that to? Because It wasn't so much that it was a big revelation, but it showed a vision that said this could be done. And it's so compelling when you see a visual thing that when A, it's credible, B, it seems to make sense, and there's a need for it. So, I mean, this is kind of the thing that I based my entire Disney career on, and my career since then on.
Right. I mean, that was a time where the American public had no clear vision about how we would make it into space, especially in the near future at that time. So, I mean, it was so useful. And like you said, it's the music and the production and everything about it is really in harmony.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And think about the time in the 50s, the early 50s or the mid 50s, I should say. We were coming out of World War II. You know, there were rockets that were being launched into London. It was a terrible thing. But now we were talking about kind of the 50s having that kind of positive energy, and everyone's going to have a better life and all that. And so that's what so now suddenly Walt saying, well, you know what, we're going to take this technology and we're going to use it for the good of mankind. All right. So that was, I think, the essence of it. And then there were two more shows, Man on the Moon and Mars and Beyond. And I think those were really good. I have to say that I'm not entirely sure that they were quite as compelling as the first one, but right. But it still told the story. So I'll end this little piece here on the cherry on top of the cherry. So the cherry on top of the cherry kind of relates to what you're talking about tonight. Is when I was doing a lot of concept illustrations and things like that for Epcot Center way back in 1977. That's when I started on this stuff. I had the opportunity to work with Ward Kimball. And so that was like I came full circle, from the guy on television to this goofy guy who was setting up the World of Motion Pavilion for Epcot Center. So that was kind of like, I came full circle and put the cherry on the top.
What, did you ever talk to him about the shows?
I did a little bit, but he also did a whole series of, I think he did some things. He did some shows on his own where he was interviewed and he was talking about this. And I remember him, Ward in the 1950s Man in Space, I was like a guy with a button-down suit and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. And then the next time I, saw some of his stuff, and we did talk a little bit about it, but, this guy did so many things and he was so nuts. He was so, in a good way, he was kind of crazy. Yeah. And like, later episodes, and this is where I draw this kind of this spirit that there was really behind it. Here he is in his kind of crazy shirts with bright colors, and he would say, "This was about science fact, not science fiction." This is a guy who had a full-size locomotive and train tracks in his backyard. He was a train guy, and that's where he and Walt really connected. So he was like. I don't know, these guys were real characters. I have to say that I of all the things, that I feel really extraordinarily fortunate about, and I didn't know it at the time. I kind of hinted and I kind of like realized a little bit, but it wasn't until years later that when I started in 1976, all the original designers there, Herbie Bryman, Mark Davis, Clyde Coates, Ken O'Brien, Exitencio, Sam McKim, God bless Sam McKim. All these guys are great, and I just learned so much from them. So I felt so fortunate.
You mentioned a lot of the aesthetic of those Tomorrowland episodes, and I think the Fleischer Superman, that's a great comparison that I'd never really thought of before, but I can see that.
If you're familiar with that, doesn't it look? It has that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, it's something we talked about. Something I always say is that they did so well, that their art direction for that space stuff was so great. It really kills me that Walt never really did any hard sci-fi after that. Of course, he wasn't around too much longer, but they were so good at it. I would have loved to have seen a movie in that style.
I think I could push back on it. I'll tell you. There's a little movie called 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, and again, I learned this post years later because I worked with all the people. But Harper Goff's design of the Nautilus for 20,000 Leagues is one of the greatest science fiction vehicles, right up there with the Millennium Falcon. That's
absolutely,
totally.
I don't know can you see over my shoulder way?
I was eyeballing that before. Yes.
So I don't know. Probably in 2009, the company was thinking about doing another 20,000 Leagues movie, and so we met with the director, and they're working the stories. And so I designed I mean, first of all, I mean, my connection with 20,000 Leagues is kind of overwhelming. You know, the fact that I'm the only one who's ever built a full-size Nautilus interior.
Right.
Okay. And then I worked on the movie, and I designed a 21st century Nautilus, which I streamlined it, and that's what the rendering is back to people.
Okay. To circle back to the Tomorrowland shows about the storytelling.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about when we were discussing it, how closely the structure of these shows mirrored how the original Epcot attractions, which would be 20 years later or more, were laid out. It starts off with this sort of comedic look at the history, followed by a real vision of the future, a science factual, like you said. That seems to me a really effective way of storytelling, because they used it in the shows. It worked great. 25 years later, you see the same thing. And, you know, in A World of Motion is a great example of that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, sometimes they got kind of a slave to that. You know, I mean, there was a point in time where I was, you know, thinking, why are all of our shows going from cavemen to space shuttles? You know, it really was. You know, but I do believe, you know, something, you know, a show like Horizons, in my opinion, was more like Magic Highways, which I really, you know, Magic Highways. You know, that was another one. I mean, it was interesting how in Magic Highways what they did is, because that was more kind of like society and technology and all that. But, you know, like these, you will be able to go on these, you know, super streamlined highways that go, you know, not only across the desert, but in the ocean and all that. But also he talked about machines that would bore holes right through the side of a mountain and melt these things through, or machines that would actually build bridges. And as they build the bridge actually supports this, you know, massive machine, you know, and, you know, people living in these houses, like, you know, the Monsanto home of the future, which again, I loved, but all these things, you know, your house, they had these big screens, you know, big screens for television, and downstairs, the car was being maintained by robots. And, you know, I mean, I don't know. I have to love all that stuff. You know, corny as hell. But the fact is, but, and again, I'm going to tell you right now, the reason I found it compelling is the same reason I find it compelling today. I think people need to see and hear and view positive future experiences. That's what we are so inundated with negativity, and the press is killing us and all that. I just, like, somebody's got to say, like, and that's what I'm doing. I'm actually working on making a positive future. I'm not a future dystopian kind of guy, like the whole world is going to end.
Right.
I'm just not. I'm just not. You know.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, why not take the high road?
Well, I mean, we mentioned off air that you know, the you know, Epcot really having shaped my career and life. I think we grew up in that period of. I mean, the 80s was this way, of like really positive future. Like, you'd read Omni magazine and it would be so exciting about what was coming, and then you'd go to Epcot and it was real. It was like, this is really what it's going to be like.
But you know what's interesting about that, what I find interesting about that is that, you know, at that time, I'm sure, you know, we talked about highways that went across the country, and, you know, you could nonstop from here and from New York to LA or whatever. But I think that there was also this kind of magic of saying someday, you know, we'll be all communicating together, and we'll have this internet computer thing where we're all working with this, and phones can call everything. And you're like, wow, the dream is always better. Fundamentally, that's the basis of all world's fairs, right?
Yeah.
They actually show technology there. So what happens is that now we get, like, okay, now, we can get these computer boxes, okay? And we can get on that internet machine, and we can talk about ideas. And what happens is that it just kind of doesn't fulfill the prophecy of positiveness. It kind of stirs this thing. And believe me, I'm no interest in talking about politics or beliefs that people have, but I'm just saying, you know, there's something interesting about when, you know, the prophecy of the future, does it fulfill, the needs of humans? There's a real psychological and sociological impact on what I think that these things are about.
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about Disneyland. I mean, you grew up in Southern California. At the time you did, you got to see Disneyland grow up with you. We talked to Scott Gerard, who even saw the construction site progressing growing up in Anaheim. And like you said, you were up in Glendale. I was wondering what it was like to watch the park progress through the years Walt was around guiding its development.
Well, I mean, there was nothing in the world like Disneyland. I mean, I have all these photographs of myself there in 1955 and with my family, and it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was like, I mean, somebody dedicated a whole theme park. And the fact, I mean, and it was so amazingly and so incomprehensible in a way that not only was this a park, because we've been to parks before, and, I used to, I was in Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts or whatever. We'd go to these movie ranches up in Chatsworth, Oregonville. And this is, up in Chatsworth is where a lot of the old Western stars used to live. And, and it was like, so you could see some of these, and also being in the Hollywood area, you would see sets and stuff like that. But Disneyland was like, this was like really organized fun.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's kind of what you just weren't used to that. And so, and also the fact that I had an older brother who was 3 years older than me, and so we would lose our parents as fast as possible, and because you weren't going to get lost, and it was safe, and it was just like so magical. And I have to say, I started writing this story about my experiences at Disneyland, and the thing that completely. I mean, the whole experience was unique. I mean, from the attractions to, the heat of the day transitioning to the cool of the evening, and when all the lights would come on and the twinkle lights and the fireworks, this in the 50s just did not exist. And it was like, holy mackerel, this was like amazing. I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, it was overwhelming. And then, of course, I would always try and convince my brother. I was kind of like, hey, let's, because I'm the little brother, so I was like, but I was more kind of savvy to this. And I was kind of like, hey, let's go over to Tomorrowland. And when you think about that the magic of that mission, Flight to the Moon attraction, you go in and you go into that big round room and the screen that's above and below, and you sit in these seats that end up vibrating and all that. I have to say that years later, when I was working at Disney, I saw the original drawing that John Hench had done. And you actually, in John Hench's sketch, you went to this gantry and you went into the rocket. And the rocket had the same show inside, but it was kind of a fatter, squatter,
Wow.
And I'm like, holy smokes, why didn't they do that idea?
Yeah.
Seriously, yeah.
But do we talk about my feelings about the story? Because I think the story is, is just amazing, and it's amazing in comparison to what the later shows, what the later stories were, where you actually go into this room, it's a circular room and all these seats. We're looking at this horizontal screen and a screen above and below, but, they were flat. You're not looking right at the screen. You're looking kind of above and below, but you could look down at them. So it's showing the rocket lifts off. It lifts off from Tomorrowland at Disneyland. And so, when the vibration starts and the whole room vibrates and the seats vibrate and they have these little actuators in the seat and all that stuff. It's kind of corny, but you kind of like it because I kind of like this being corny,
Yeah.
Right?
And as a kid, you buy into it. It's not real, but you buy in.
You go for the ride, right?
Yeah.
You go for And so we're, we get in the rocket and now there's a countdown and all these the sets were probably they were probably not as good as what I remember them to be, but they were effective, right?
Yeah.
It's probably just flashing lights. And then the narrator, and I don't know if it was Winston Hibbler or I don't know whoever the heck it was, So we're leaving Los Angeles, we're launching out of or out of Southern California. And it mentions like, okay, well, there it is. The smog-filled skies of Southern like, okay, well, listen, we're going to really go for real on this. And so then we head to the moon. And then as you're heading, they're telling you the story, and you can see the Earth on the lower screen getting smaller and the moon getting bigger on the upper screen, And then, then it becomes this whole magical thing. You get to the moon and we go around the back side of the moon. And I got to tell you, this is where, and again, I loved it at the time, but I didn't realize the power of storytelling until years later when I really thought about that show, because the show got changed out, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So they're talking about like it's going on to the backside of the moon from the Earth. We've never seen the backside of the moon. It always kind of travels, with us, the gravity connection. And they shoot these rockets out, these flares or whatever it is, and it hits the impact of the moon, and it throws these big shadows across the craters. And then there's this kind of geometric pattern. And then the narrator's like, could this been an ancient civilization?
Oh, that's
you
great.
Are hooked. I'm telling you, you're hooked. And it's corny, but you are hooked, right? It's like, could this have been? So then, you go all the way around the moon and we're heading back to Earth, and you're like, wow. And you feel, and I think this is a really important story point, is that you're kind of filled with the wonder of all this. And then we come back and we land, and, the rocket looks like the TWA rocket that was in Tomorrowland.
Right.
And it settles down and we launch at the end of the ride. Okay. And it's like, wow, that was really cool. Guess what? It was worth going, right? That's So then years and years and years later, after in 1969, when we landed on the moon, they changed the show, right? So it was like Mission to Mars. So anyway, we fly.
That's what we came up with
that's right.
Mission to Mars.
Right.
That was our era.
So here's the comparison. So you start the same show, you launch, and then you go through some kind of a magic, space warpy kind of thing of Mars. And then you get on Mars, you're landing going across the surface of Mars, and there's this huge storm, and it's like dangerous, and we have to get back to Earth.
Yeah.
And you get out of the show going, what the heck did we go to Mars for?
Yeah, it always felt like a ripoff. It was like, well, we didn't get to go to Mars.
So on one, you were captured by the imagination. Could this have been an ancient civilization? Or you go to Mars and there's a big storm, we have to go home. Storytelling. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
It's like, sorry, guys, your vacation's canceled. You got to go home.
I mean, I was just like, wow, like, didn't you see the first show? I mean, you have to capture people's imagination. Right. And that's what all of these things were really about.
What were some other things about that early, pre-1967 Tomorrowland that captured you?
Well, let's see what they had. First of all, I have this great photograph. I don't know did I send you the photographs that I have of myself at Disneyland?
No, I'd love to see them.
Well, I'll send them to you. I have some. As a matter of fact, I didn't see them till for many. I was already working at Disney when I think my sister said, "Oh, here, you want to see these?" And I have like 10 photographs. And the thing that's shocking is that my parents actually took pictures of us at Disneyland, black and white photos, right?
Yeah.
And I have a great photograph of my brother and I in the Astrojets.
Okay? Oh, cool.
And the reason that's so compelling is this is when it was on the ground, and it was the original Tomorrowland set. And so I ended up, I built the Orbitron in Paris, the same Orbitrons at Disneyland.
Mm-hmm.
I did Hong Kong. So I built these things. And at the time, they're just kind of roundy rides. But I had to, for Paris, especially when I did the Orbitron there, and because we had this kind of, great European visionaries theme that was going on. So I did this kind of, it could be Leonardo da Vinci, it could be Jules Verne kind of mechanical planetary model thing. So that one, which is the same one you see at Disneyland, the entrance to Tomorrowland, that was kind of like, even though it was a simple round ride, it kind of checked off the three categories that I always thought was really important. Number one, it was an icon. It represented what the land was. Number two, it was a kinetic sculpture, which when you do Tomorrowlands, because all Tomorrowlands nowadays have these big giant boxes.
Yes.
The attractions happen inside, then there's no animation in the land. Okay.
Right.
So I said, I need something in the middle of the land to do all this stuff. So it became, it was an icon. It's, it was all it was like a big major deal. It was a kinetic thing, and it was a ride. You actually rode it. Okay. Now, for me in '67, when they did the Tomorrowland at Disneyland, it was like you had the rocket jets on top of where the people mover were, the people mover track, which is above you. You had the monorail, the skyway, the submarines, and it was, and I could probably, they had the boats.
Autopia, yeah.
So Tomorrowland at that time was a land on the move. Everything was moving. And of all the things that I really took away from, in terms of what, I did, how many, I worked, I built 3 Space Mountains. I did 2, I did Hong Kong, and I did Disneyland Paris, and I worked on the Disneyland Tomorrowland. And I worked on concepts for Tomorrowland with George Lucas when he was, coming in to work with us. But every one of them, and what I don't, lands in Disney parks, you can chisel this in concrete, and you can believe it or not, lands in Disney parks have to have visual animation.
Amen.
We agree completely.
I don't care if it's the Mark Twain or the Columbia coming in at Disneyland or Splash Mountain dropping down. And not only it was the primary reason for Disneyland Paris. When I did the Space Mountain there, I put that cannon on the side of the building. I wanted people launched and catapulted up the side of the building. That's what I wanted, and I got it. And it, we had the cannon recoil, and steam came out, and everybody looked at it, and it made the guest part of the show. And you have to do that kind of thing. You just have to do it. It's just, you have to make these places, the place itself. You can talk about theming and storytelling and placemaking, but they have to be animated. This is like, put this into your guidebook. This is,
please, yes.
That I totally agree should be like one of the top, tip top commandments. And I think that 67 Tomorrowland, it's almost impossible to find a bad picture of that Tomorrowland because there's so many vertical layers of motion. Yeah. And you've got the Skyway, you've got there's so much stuff, and it's all moving, and it just absolutely looks incredible.
I want to talk about, you mentioned you joined WED at a time when, all these legends were still there. It was a time when a new generation of Imagineers were coming up that would shape things for years to come. I was wondering if you could talk about what that was like to kind of meet those two streams together, and if you had some folks that helped you find your way in Imagineering of that old guard.
Yeah, well, it was an amazing time for me. The way I got my job at WED was I went to Art Center College of Design.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was in Los Angeles at the time. It was a long time ago. And it was a real, when I kind of tinkered with art in my life, and I didn't have any art training in high school. But then when I got into college, I got fed up with that. I said, I'm going to start learning a discipline in art. So eventually I got to Art Center, and I had an instructor there. And I graduated out of Art Center, and 3 years later, I get a call from a teacher of mine from Art Center. And he said, he works for WED, this place called WED Enterprises. And he's head of the graphics department. And I wanted to know if I wanted a job there. And I was like in the middle of other things. I had my own business. And I was like, no. And I said, no. As I tell you this story, you're going to understand why I said no. But essentially I was like, And then 6 months later, I was kind of interested, and they weren't. And then 6 months after that, we mutually got together. And so I started on June 1st of 1976.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I mean, I know dinosaurs were ruling the earth at that time.
That's a big time, a big moment.
Well, it was interesting because, when I told people like, well, I'm working for this, I got this job and I started working at this place. And from the second, it was a little bit like when I went to Art Center. The second I walked in, I went, oh my God, this is the place I belong. And then when I walked in, on Flower, after I actually could find it, it was a very secret place. I mean, there was no name. There's this enormous campus. And to this day, I mean, you can see now it kind of looks like everybody knows this Disney. At that time, there were all these industrial buildings that were just like, nondescript. I mean, the only sign that gave an indication is that when you went down Sonora, turned down on Flower Street, there was a parking lot next to this giant building. And on the parking lot had a regular street sign, right? A regular kind of street sign, or kind of a cartoony Disneyland, a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. And it said Wed Way.
Yeah. That's right. That's right.
It didn't say Disney, it doesn't say, there's no name that says Imagineering, none, zero. Okay, zero. So anyway, I started working there, and I was working in the graphics department. And what I was doing in the graphics department, I was doing all their illustrations. For example, I did a whole series of paintings for Main Street. When Sunkist came in on Main Street, I would do the exterior renderings and the interior elevations, and it would show the graphics for Sunkist sponsoring, this particular, juice bar, or something like that. So anyway, I did that. And also I started actually working on real projects. They were building Space Mountain at Disneyland at that time. And there was a whole arcade going in called Starcade. And I did all the design work for that. But that's not, and I'm going to get to believe me, I haven't forgotten your question. Sure. But I will tell you that a couple of stories right off the bat. Number one, I tell people I work for this place called Wed Enterprises, which was Walt Disney's personal design company. And they built Walt Disney World. And, people are like, you work for Disney? Is that little cartoon thing in the valley?
Oh, gee.
Yeah. No, but this is different. This is Walt's personal company that he actually started, to work for Disneyland. So, so you work at Disneyland. Do you like go to work and you wear a pirate outfit? I'm like, no.
So close.
So I was like, yeah, okay. So think about those days when people are like scratching their head going, Disney, and look at what the Disney juggernaut is today. I mean, and I saw that happen. And that's
absolutely.
So what I did is that in those days, every day at 10 o'clock, 10 to 10:15, we'd have a break. And there was another one late in the afternoon from 3 to 3:15. It was a break. And we worked 8 to 5. And then lunchtime. And I would spend probably 90% of my time there when I was working, when I didn't have to be at my desk drawing stuff. I walked and I made this whole circuit. And everything was on the 1401 campus. MAPO was there, which is where all their heavy construction was, where they built animatronic figures. We had model shop there, special effects, and all that. And I had this whole circuit, and I spent every available moment going going to every department and talking to the people and seeing what was going on. I remember going through Pelican Alley. Pelican Alley is where they would assemble animatronic figures, and here are all these guys in white coats and transition, like looking down a hallway, and there's 15 animatronic figures, and these guys were all building this. It was like a scene out of a science fiction movie, and I'm like, holy cow. So then, another day I would change my. I will tell you, after I would do this for several days, and I would just walk through, and I'd be like, because I was starstruck. I was like, wow, this is amazing, you know. And so you kind of learn to see, and people get used to seeing you, and like, hey, so, you know. And this one guy comes up to me one day and he goes, hey, you want to see something I've been working on? I'm like, yeah, sure. You know, I was a boisterous kind of person. I was just so fascinated, right?
Yeah.
And so I walk up to his work desk there, and there's a cloth hanging, you know, it's draped over what obviously is some kind of a head, you know, an animatronic head. And he pulls the cloth off, you know, and he's like, yeah, I've been working on this on my own, you know. And he picks up a microphone like this and he starts talking. And as soon as he talks, the mouth would move and sing.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, and this guy, I won't say his name because he started his own animation business. He was a technician there. He was just like, yeah, I had this idea. These guys used to tinker and they used to try to figure out how to do this stuff. And then other days, you know, I'd walk into the sculpting lab where Blaine Gibson was the master sculptor there. And you're surrounded by 200 heads, whether they were pirates or presidents, you know, and they'd be sculpting. And Blaine was, you know, he'd have these pictures of a president or some, you know, character they wanted. And then he'd be sitting there sculpting in his white lab coat and very calm, very genteel kind of gentleman. You know, he was just amazing. Or then you'd go into, you know, the buildings were all kind of industrial buildings. So there's nothing romantic or exciting about these things, but in a sense, they actually mimic a lot how sound stages work in a studio.
Mm-hmm.
You know, sound stages are just big empty warehouses, but they can turn them into anything, right? So that's all they were. You know? So I'd walk in. I remember walking into the special effects area, and I walked into this bar. I walked into a bar. You know, I mean, you know, you're in this set, and you could see the bars there, and the, you know, the glass backing. And it looked like an old Western bar. You know, and the thing was up and running. And you could sit at one of the table or sit at one of the chairs at the bar. And if you did, you looked in the mirror and you have one of those old kind of mirror glass things. And you know, and a ghost would come up into the mirror and then disappear. Or they had
oh, cool.
They had the ship in a bottle where there'd be a storm and the ship would sink and then it'd come back again. And they just had it running. They must have had some presentation, you know, and I'm like, you know, and this is Yale Gracie who was head of it, and Roger Broggie Jr. And I mean, Yale Gracie was, I mean, these guys, I've written this thing that I'm working on. I've actually written about these days. And that's one of the reasons why I comes to mind quickly. But I said, the title of the chapter was kind of exploring Imagineering and finding gods. Mm-hmm. And that's what you found. Or you walked into the model shop. Who does not love model shop? Right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
They're Disney models. And this is when they used to hand make these, you know, beautiful, beautiful models. They were just working on some concepts for Epcot at the time. This is the very beginning. This is in 76. So, and then, you know, my best days were to go upstairs in the concept design department, and Herb Ryman was there.
Wow. Yeah.
Like I said, Mark Davis was on the Gold Coast. Exitencio, and I was like, the funny thing, and I will tell you about this, is the thing that I found to be most interesting about this is that at the time, no one knew who these guys were. Nobody knew.
Right.
Nobody knew Mark Davis. Nobody knew Clyde Coates. Nobody knew Walt Paraguay. Nobody knew Sam McKim. You know, nobody knew Colin Campbell. Nobody knows them. Okay, but the world knew their work.
Yes.
I mean, Davis did every scene, you know, did all the scenes for Pirates. You know, I mean, there's just like, these are amazing guys, you know. And so here's the real thing. So I, you know, going back and stepping back and telling you, like when I went to Art Center is a very demanding art school. It's a very commercial-oriented school. I mean, it isn't like, it's very demanding, okay? You have to work all the time, right? So I was just working all the time. So here I am going through Imagineering, and I'm looking at this place, and there were these rumors that, you know, there was this whole thing, there was this kind of stirring that they were working on a new project called Epcot Center. Mm-hmm. And Epcot Center was going to be this kind of Walt's dream of a future city, but it was going to be more kind of World's Fairish. And I'm a big World's Fair fan. I went to the 61 fair. I went to the 64 fair in New York.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah. What happened is that the 64 fair, I was in Boy Scouts, I think at the time. And so I was going to go to the Boy Scout Jamboree in Valley Forge. So coming from California, the Boy Scout Jamboree is 1 week long. But what we did is we went there, went to the East Coast. Our troop went there, and we spent a few days in New York, and we spent a few days in Washington, D.C. before we went to Valley Forge. So this completely blows my mind. I'll be honest with you. I was one of the older ones. I was one of the older kids. I was probably, I think, 14, something like that. And so they would assemble us at 9:00 in the morning, give us $5, and say, "Tell us to check in at 9:00 at night."
Wow, those were the days, man. Those were the days.
Man. So me and my buddies, we went to the World's Fair.
Oh, that's cool.
Amazing.
Can you imagine? I don't even know how the hell we got out there. I mean, obviously we had to get in, and I remember going by places and looking at hamburgers for 50 cents. I'm like, oh my God, that's the most expensive.
That must be an amazing hamburger.
But everything in New York was super expensive, but it was all relative, I don't know. So anyway, the 64 World's Fair, where kind of Walt got his whole, Small World, Great Moments with Lincoln, the Ford attraction.
Did you see any of those?
I didn't. The ones I really, I think I went through the Ford one because it was kind of going through the future stuff, but I didn't see Lincoln. I mean, most of these times, it was a one day at a World's Fair, and there were like 1 billion people there. You just couldn't.
Yeah, right,
I remember walking the grounds, but it was. We were kind of. I mean, for 14, we were a little bit rowdy. The other kids, they had. We were just like on our own. Can you imagine letting kids in New York?
I know.
I still can't believe it. So anyway, the reason I'm telling you all this is it and the comment about Art Center working all the time. So literally for my first year, I'd work all day, at Imagineering, doing my graphic stuff or whatever. And then I went home and I worked on a new portfolio every night. And I said, I think I could do more for this company. So I worked on this thing for a whole year. And so I went to my boss one day and I said to him, I think I could do more for the company. And they're talking about doing an Epcot. And all of the guys like Herbie and Sam and all the guys who did the illustration, these guys were great artists. And they were like Sam McKim did some of those beautiful watercolor renderings you've ever seen. And he happened to be a child movie star. He did old Westerns. He was a kid, and I loved Sam was just great. I mean, I really love these guys, but they weren't nobody was like real futurists, none of them. So I worked on, scenes from architectural scenes and settings and all these drawings and all that. So after a year, I went to my boss. I said, I think I could do more. I really would love to show my stuff to John Hinch and Marty Sklar. So he's like, yeah, okay. It wasn't a great enthusiasm, but it was like, yeah, okay. But I didn't care. I mean, I've been down at, Disneyland working on Space Mountain because we put the Starcade in and they were finishing that up. And one of the other guys, George McGinnis was a big designer for Space Mountain at Disneyland. And he did the whole launch port there, which I thought was just like spectacular.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I set up this meeting with John Hinch and Marty Sklar, brought my portfolio in and to the Edie's conference room, and so started showing stuff to them. And I go through his art, and I just told them, really, this is what I really love to do, and all that. And suddenly Marty kind of looks at me and he goes, "Don't you already work here?" Yeah, I do, but I think I could help you on this Epcot project. So they say, yeah, okay, yeah, sure. So whatever. And the man who was the art director for Epcot is a man by the name of John DeCure Jr. John DeCure, his father was a very famous art director in Los Angeles. I mean, he was the art director for Cleopatra, and he was the art director for Hello Dolly, and the only man who broke 20th Century Fox twice. So, so I showed him my stuff, and he's like, "Well, okay, but we're just kind of getting off the ground." And I said, "Great, I said, whatever. I'm just offering my services. This is what I do. Is what I love to do. I give my Man in Space and Magic Highway speech and all this stuff." So and nothing really happened for about 2 weeks, and then I went on vacation. I came back from vacation, and as soon as I came in on vacation, my boss, he calls me and he goes, "I hate to tell you this, but I'm going to have to let you go." And from Imagineering or from WED, I was like, "Oh, okay, all right, it was a good run, fine." So I got out of his office, walked over to my desk, and I had done a whole series of travel posters for Space Mountain. I pinned it. I just walked over my desk, set everything down. I mean, I took everything off the walls, and I just put them on my arm. And I walked into John DeCure's office. And I said, "They've just let me go, and I don't want to leave, and I can help you. I think I can help you." So he's like, "Well, I don't really know." So they let me go.
Oh my gosh! Never go on vacation. I think it was Eddie Sato who said, "Never go on vacation."
So yeah, it sounds like Eddie, But so anyway, so I go through the whole checkout thing. They gave me 2 weeks severance pay. I went home. 1 week later, I get a call. "Will you come back into work?" And it was the Bill. What's his name? I can't remember. He was one of the kind of overall Disneyland art director, old time art director.
Mm-hmm. So
he goes, "Well, we're thinking about bringing you back, but we're not raising your salary in any way." I'm like, "That's okay. It's okay." So they did. They moved me upstairs in the concept design department right next to Herb Ryman.
Oh, wow.
And I got my drawing table out. I got all my paints, and I got the stuff out. And so the John DeCure Jr. would come in and he'd say, like, "I need this point of view, and I need this point of view, and I need this point of view." And I learned to paint, from Herb Ryman, not his style, because Herbie would come in with a beautiful shirt with an ascot and be wearing a dark blue velvet jacket.
Yeah.
Sit there with this. For me, I had paint all down my arm. I had
right.
I didn't care. And I sat probably for at least a year or maybe longer than that. And I just drew and painted. And I have to tell you, we were doing this whole thing on Epcot and down at USC, and I showed some of my artwork. And actually, when they opened it up for questions, the first two questions were leveled at me, like, "What did you start with? How did you start with?" And for some inexplicable reason, I'm going to tell you this flat out, I have no idea why I know how to do this, but I can look at a site plan and I can just draw in perspective. I don't know why I have the skill. No one in my family knows how to draw. I mean, growing up, I don't know why. I have this thing about architectural design that I just know it's right. And if you look at my stuff, or you look at my Disney stuff, I always show that here's the concept rendering and this is what we built, and they almost match. And yeah. I don't think I have a superpower. I don't know what it is, but that's all I do. And that's what I did. And so when I showed these paintings down at USC, as soon as the first ones came up, there was a whole gasp that goes through the audience. And these things, the drawings aren't very good. But what I did is I had to learn how to paint fast. And I went not down to, and they have a whole, in the model shop, well, connected up the warehouse, they have this whole area dedicated to art supplies. But what I did is I went over to the maintenance department and got a house brush, like a house painting brush. And what I did is I just did these big giant stripes right through the artwork and then hit details on them. Because there are paintings that I was actually showing paintings that don't even have done, because they would say, "Well, you had this idea, can you do this? And then I would do it. I get halfway through it and say, stop, throw that away. We're going to do it. It's another idea, and it was constantly like that. But I loved every second. I worked, I literally did hundreds of paintings, hundreds of them. I know that Disney has 1,200 of my paintings. That doesn't have digital ones.
Wow. Holy moly.
Painting, illustrations.
Well, it just seems like the Epcot project more than any other was it because they were trying to get sponsorships or what? It just seems more fine art concept stuff was done for this park than anything else.
The technology for imaging just wasn't there. A lot, and that's one of the reasons why the model shop became so strong at Disney, because they weren't, you don't have SketchUp and Enscape and, all the other digital services you see today, that today, but you had to just draw it. And I could just draw. I mean, I don't say that with, I say it with a sense of reality to it. I don't know why I have this skill. I mean, it's kind of weird for me to say that. It sounds like I have some superpower, and I don't mean that, but I can tell you the key to my success, and I'm going to tell you right now, the key to my success on doing all artwork, and I'm talking, I mean, I was a producer. I have to do a lot of the art, all the stuff I did for Paris was when I was doing it. I'd go to work all day and be in meetings because I was running projects with teams, and then I'd do all the artwork at home. But I was just used to working all the time. I mean, you look at this. I mean, you're in my studio now. This is where I live.
Yeah.
But I just would do the work, and what I was going to say is, I could say, when you're in the creative design business, your job is to create images that allow people to make decisions. So what I would generally do is I would present things, especially with Eisner and Frank Wells and that whole administration, but even earlier than that, you create something and you go, this is what I think it's going to look like. You're not just creating a place, but you're creating the experience, right? And I would say 99% of the time I was successful. And when I say I'm successful, it doesn't mean that we went forward with it. It means that I provided an image or a story or a scenario that allowed management to make a decision. Sometimes, Eisner would go, that's great, let's do it. We're going forward. We're going to do what he just said, that's what we're doing. Or they go, that's not what we want at all. So that made a decision. What I hate is going into meetings where people are like, well, it could be this, it could be that, and I don't know. And then people are like, okay, well, meeting's over, let's all go home. And no one decided on anything. This happens all the time.
That never happens. What are you talking about?
All the time. And there are people who are really good at it. I mean, really, really great at it. Eddie is great for that. He gets, whether he does his drawings or, he's got other people or whatever, Eddie, Tony Baxter, the people who really got stuff done, you have to kind of know the whole process. Now, whether you're doing the artwork like I did, or you have somebody else do it, but you're directing it, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is how to move projects forward and getting them, going. That's really the key. And the more abstract you can be, the better it is. So let me tell you this one story. This was completely amazing. And I wish I had the artwork here to show you. I do, but I'd have to show you. I got this call when I was doing, just locked in my cave, just, pushing stuff out the door. By the way, while I'm thinking about it, and the one of the things that I truly treasured would be I'd go off to lunch or I'd go on a break and I'd come back and I would see a little note or a tissue paper drawn over one of my things, not drawn on my painting, but over it. And I'd be looking at it and I'm like, that Herb Ryman.
That's amazing.
He would come in and he would draw things. And we had this ongoing thing for years about space dogs, and space dogs would be like, they'd be pointing at something and the space dog would make some comment, about my artwork or something.
Oh, that's great.
Herbie was so great. He was just great. And he would tell me the inside stories about Disney and Walt and all that stuff. Anyway, so one day I get this call and it said, "Oh, we're going to do this big giant. We need to do this big. It's a big space pavilion." And you're gonna love this because it kind of relates back to my mission, flight to the moon story. So, John DeCure Sr., I told you, the big art director there, he was brought in. He was going to be brought in to do the space pavilion, and the concept was going to be a vertical. Imagine this: a vertical circle vision. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I told you they had screens above and below. Now they're going to do a whole circle vision. And so I'm like, and then like, yikes. And so somebody had an idea, but I had to paint this. I mean, I had to make it look like a real place, right? So they said, but before we're going to go too far, you have to go tomorrow morning. You have to be at Disneyland at 6 o'clock in the morning. And we're going to have a test at the Circle Vision Theater. And they're going to run a star field.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, yeah, well, how's that going to work? Well, you just go to Disneyland, okay? It's 6 in the morning. Be there, right? Be there by 6:30, right? Okay. So I remember going the backstage, walking through what is kind of like through Bear Country now, through New Orleans Square and all that. There was no one in the park. In the park, it was like one of these spring days. It was just so beautiful, you know. And I'm like, it was like I kind of stood there as I was going to the Circle Vision Studio or Circle Vision Theater in Tomorrowland. I was just thinking, God, you know, this park is just like, it's a beautiful park,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I go over there and there are all these people standing around, including Ron Miller, who was the president of Walt Disney.
Oh, wow. Okay.
All right.
So then they had the special effects guys and the film production guys, and it's all, everyone's kind of all bundled up and trying to find coffee, and you know. So anyway, so they go, okay, listen, we got to get this test going. We got to get this test going. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to run a star field, you know, on all the screens, all 9 screens. Yeah. So like, yeah. So when you go into the theater, what we want you to do is lay down. So, you know, the handrails come up and it's a big looping handrail, you know, so you can sit, you can lay down in it. And I was like, well, this is pretty cool. I mean, this is kind of what I expected. You know, this is all my dreams came true with Imagineering, because everything was as nuts and crazy and not organized and not, it was just nuts. Right?
Yeah.
So I climb up, you know, I'm a young guy at the time. This is like a million years ago. So I'm climbing up and I'm laying on this thing, and then the handrails are going across my back, you know. And I'm looking and I look across to the side, and here's Ron Miller, all 6'5", you know, ex-Los Angeles Ram football player guy, president of the Walt Disney Company and Walt Disney's son-in-law. And I'm looking at this going, this is crazy. This is really crazy. So anyway,
it's interesting they had him there for that.
Yeah, you know, that you're exactly right. I was shocked that he was there. I mean, I don't know what motivated him. I don't know how anybody got him out of his, like, whatever he did. But I like Ron. Ron ended up being a really nice guy. He wasn't the right guy for the company, but he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, this is nuts. So the funny thing is about this, and my big takeaway about this was that if you had heard about this concept about a vertical a circle vision, you know, and you know you're going to sit, you know, it's like your 2 sides are like this, with a circle vision like right like this, and you're like, you know, if you thought this is never going to work, okay, there was that school of thought, or hey, this is like a really cool idea. So we did this test, and whatever you thought it was going to be, the test confirmed it.
Yeah.
You said it's never going to work. You walked out, and everybody looked at each other and went, "You see? What did I tell you?"
Yeah.
So I got to know what you thought. Did you think it worked?
Yeah, no one would say that. It's like, I just told you. Like, you know, they go, well, what do you mean? Like, I told you it would never work. I said, no, I thought it worked great. No, I told you it wasn't going to work. No, I thought, like, I was just like, you know, okay, so this is kind of the balance between, you know, what the creative process is all about. And that's kind of the thing that people don't, don't understand. You kind of, like I said, you have to draw from your own experiences, and at that time, it was kind of like, this was like, Imagineering really started out as just a bunch of goofy guys who had ideas and said, well, yeah, let's just try this.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it became more science and all that. When I started there were 450 people. And then by the time we got done with Epcot, there were 3,000 people. And then they had to let 90% of them go.
Yeah.
So anyway, I ended up doing this giant painting, and the painting is about, I don't know, maybe a little less than 5 feet across. I love still to do it. I love painting really big stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, there was no way to kind of like, you weren't projecting any artwork. It was like you had to put it on a wall. When you go into like theme parks conference room or some of the other big conference rooms, if you put like a little, 11 by 17 sketch up on there, it's like looking at a postage stamp. You had to do these giant paintings, so that's what I did. I had to paint everything. You're just painting stuff. You just start and you do it. Herbie did that. I watched Herbie do that. But he had just he's the one that kind of taught me, like, get a big giant brush and don't ever, Marty Sklar used to have this thing, like the most frightening thing is a blank piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Well, which I never really bought into to a certain extent, but I understood also what he was saying. But I did it my own way. I never liked a white, board. So I would just paint something, Herbie would just like paint these just big, he'd gesso the whole board and then he'd throw paint on it and then he'd start painting on top of it. It's like a middle ground. So what happens, you put a big wash across that middle ground and then you go darker and lighter. And then it takes the pain away from painting on white surfaces, But
he gets bolder and bolder. Like when you look at his stuff, like as he got older, it just got bolder and bolder. Like some of that late period stuff, like stuff he did for Paris and for Indiana Jones, is just wild.
It's great. His paintings for Tokyo Disneyland. I'd sit here and he'd be talking to me about something, and again he'd hold the end of a brush. Let me see if I can. Where's my? He'd hold it like this.
Yeah.
Mm.
And he'd be talking to me, and he would like do a thing like this, and there would be a whole crowd there. Do paint people, and but Herbie had a lot of again, this goes back to what people, the experiences and what it was. Here's the thing of all the things, and I think one of you guys mentioned it, in terms of the kind of the lack of technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think Epcot, in terms of its spirit and its goals, was to be about the future, but the development phase was definitely, and this is what I miss more than anything else about what Imagineering became and what it is that all the technology and everything, the imaging and all that stuff was really old school. It was people drawing on paper,
mm-hmm.
building models out of, not laser cut, they're hand cut stuff. And it was really the crafts and the artisan quality of what the parks were all about. I don't know if there's I don't want to get into in my old days, I don't care for that, but I do believe that, and I still do it now in my own work, where when you work on concepts, I'd still draw a lot of stuff by hand. I'll draw, like, just get a bunch of ideas out there.
Yeah, well, I think that it just feels more Disney to do it that way. And I mean, we've talked to people in the past about, doing what Eddie Sato calls Clicktorian architecture. It's like when you're doing it from like a vector drawing template versus when you're doing something by hand, and it has, you can really, I don't know, make it work in a way that feels authentic to whether you're doing something historical or even something futuristic. I just think it has that Disney feel. Maybe just because that's what we all grew up seeing, as this is what it is.
But I also think it's a legacy from animation.
Right.
Where they would, do stuff. Relating to this subject, and relating to those early days with those great, amazing guys. I knew Claude Coates because he used to do a lot of dark rides, and not particularly sophisticated, but but kind of the way Claude Coates would do things. And he did a lot of stuff. So it was really cool. And I was going through kind of the Art of Disney one day, and there was this beautiful watercolor, I think from Snow White, of a lit candle. And I'm looking at this and it says, drawn by Claude Coates. And I was like, wow. Wow. Yeah. Because I never saw any of that. When they were the studio, one thing when they would do it at Imagineering, they would, or WED at the time, it was, you didn't see all people's talents, I mean, John Hench's drawings that he did in the early days in the 50s, like his early drawing at Space Mountain.
Yes, that is a wild piece. Yeah.
I love those, catenary kind of roof things. I think they were fantastic. I loved it. I mean, I actually did my first Discovery Mountain. The 100-meter version of it was kind of meant to mimic that kind of thing. I mean, I never understood his the trains coming outside the building. None of that made sense. But because you actually not only could you not do it, it would just destroy the show on the inside. But the drawing was great. The drawing was great. I mean,
amazing.
I thought was really, really cool.
Well, that wraps up part one of our interview with Tim Delaney. Michael, just some amazing stories there and so much more to come.
I know. I love these guys who can talk not only about their many, many achievements, but also, the generation before them that they were able to work alongside. So it's like, you get a 2-for-1 story-wise. It's just unbelievable.
That's right. And, Tim, like so many of our guests, seems like has a real passion for, the Disney history side of things, which is always great for us to hear.
Absolutely. It's always fun when you speak to someone who kind of knew how special it was when it was going on and kind of like took mental notes about everything that was happening. And man, I'm just, so thankful Tim taking the time to share it all with us.
Absolutely. And like I said, we'll be back for another installment of the Tim Delaney Hour with us. And we have stories aplenty ahead. So decades worth. Stay tuned for that. Michael, this is a time in the podcast where I ask you if anybody's signed up for our Patreon lately.
Yes, this month we have 2 people to welcome to our venerable Patreon. I'd like to welcome Joshua and Joseph. Both of you, thank you so much for supporting the show. They'll, of course, be signing up for early access to episodes, a nice little packet of swag, and, of course, at the silver level, joining us for our monthly live stream where we get together with a bunch of pals and talk about things related to this month's episode, show some images and some video, and just have a good time. So thanks, guys, and thanks to everybody who continues to support us.
Yeah, we want to thank you all. Thanks to new folks for signing up. And if you want to join that Patreon, the address is patreon.com/ProgressCityUSA. You can also find us on Twitter. Michael is at Progress City USA. I'm at Jeff G. Crawford. And email for those of you who still do that, generation whatever, doesn't do email anymore, I guess. But podcast at Progress City USA for, the dinosaurs.
Email
like
us. I'd love, I'm on my email all the time. I'd love to hear from people.
Me too. I'm a big email guy. So please be in touch with us there. If you'd like to really get the cherry on top, you can leave us a review and a rating on the podcast platform of your choice.
Oh, that'd be
Those
nice.
are all the ways. Yeah. I mean, we've had a couple of reviews lately, so keep that up. It does help us out. So we'll be back very soon with part 2 of Tim Delaney and wonders beyond this year, 2022. From all of us to all of you, take care. We'll see you soon.